Interstate 10, Arizona. Mary Thompson felt her truck shudder as hellhounds gang bikes surrounded her rig. Their leader had already killed 2 drivers this month, but as gang members drew weapons, they missed one crucial detail. The 3 Belgian Malinois in her cab weren't pets. They were Force Recon combat veterans with confirmed Taliban kills. Shadow, Zeus, and Athena had hunted insurgents through mountain caves and cartel killers through desert tunnels. Now, as 30 bikers moved to hijack what they thought was a simple medical transport, they were about to learn why Force Recon K9 teams were considered among the deadliest fighting units ever deployed. But before we jump back into the video, let us know where you're watching from. And if you're enjoying this story, don't forget to subscribe, because tomorrow I've got something really special for you. And now, back to the video. Dawn on Interstate 10, Arizona. Mary Thompson felt her truck shudder as hellhounds gang bikes surrounded her rig. Their leader had already killed 2 drivers this month, but as gang members drew weapons, they missed one crucial detail. The 3 Belgian Malinois in her cab weren't pets. They were Force Recon combat veterans with confirmed Taliban kills. Shadow, Zeus, and Athena had hunted insurgents through mountain caves and cartel killers through desert tunnels. Now, as 30 bikers moved to hijack what they thought was a simple medical transport, they were about to learn why Force Recon K9 teams were considered among the deadliest fighting units ever deployed. Shadow's low growl was the first warning. A sound Mary had heard countless times in combat zones when trouble approached. Through her mirrors, she counted 12 bikes behind her truck, another 8 pulling alongside. Zeus and Athena remained silent but alert, their muscles coiled, with the same tension she'd seen before 100 military operations. "Final warning, lady," a voice crackled through her CB radio. "Pull over now, or this gets messy." The speaker's tone carried the arrogance of someone used to being feared. "Nobody needs to die today." Mary checked her dash camera feeds, a habit. From convoy operations in Afghanistan, the bikers were executing a standard containment pattern, trying to force her onto a remote exit. 2 years ago, they'd killed a driver this way, making it look like a simple hijacking gone wrong. "Shadow, prep for contact," she whispered. The Belgian Malinois' ears twitched in acknowledgement, just like they had during night operations in Kandahar. Zeus and Athena shifted positions, taking up the same formation they'd used breaching Taliban compounds. Through her mirrors, she watched the gang's leader pull alongside her cab. Blade Rodriguez, according to the FBI briefing, responsible for 3 murders and countless hijackings. His leather vest displayed the hellhound's colors, but Mary's trained eye noted something else: body armor beneath the leather, tactical positioning that suggested military background. "You've got 5 seconds, Blade shouted over the engine noise. "Don't make us demonstrate why they call us hellhounds." Mary's hand moved to the custom latch she'd installed after leaving Force Recon. One pull would drop her cab's reinforced windows, transforming her truck into something the gang wasn't prepared for. Her dogs knew the signal. They'd practiced this scenario dozens of times. Shadow's growl deepened as bikes tightened their formation around the truck. Mary recognized their tactics, the same ones cartels used on border highways. But these bikers had no idea they were trying to intimidate someone who'd led K9 units through the worst fighting in Afghanistan. 3 seconds! Blade was losing patience. Through her cameras, she saw gang members readying weapons, cheap pistols and shotguns that looked threatening to civilian drivers, but were nothing compared to what her team had faced overseas. Zeus and Athena moved with silent precision, taking positions she'd trained them for since leaving the military. Their combat experience showed in every movement. No wasted energy, no unnecessary noise, just the focused preparation she'd seen before raids on insurgent strongholds. Last chance. Blade's voice carried the edge of someone not used to being defied. He hadn't noticed how her dogs were positioned, hadn't recognized the tactical setup of her cab. Like so many others, he saw what he expected: a female truck driver who'd be easy prey. Mary checked her mirrors one final time, mentally mapping positions just like she had during convoy operations. Her dogs were ready, her truck was prepared. Now she just had to decide whether to give these bikers one last chance to avoid learning why Force Recon K9 teams were considered among the most lethal fighting units ever deployed. Force Recon K9 handler was the one who tried shooting out Mary's tires. Shadow's ears twitched at the distinctive sound of a shotgun being racked, a noise they'd heard countless times in combat. Mary's response was immediate and practiced. "Contact left," she commanded, in the same quiet tone she'd used during night operations in Kandahar. The reinforced window dropped with pneumatic precision as Shadow launched through the opening. 300 missions worth of combat experience transformed into 40 kilos of precise violence. Holy shh! The biker's curse cut off as Shadow executed a takedown they'd perfected against insurgents. No wasted movement, no unnecessary force, just the swift efficiency that had made Force Recon K9 units legendary in combat zones. "We've got a dog," someone shouted through the radio. "Since when do truckers have attack dogs?" The panic in his voice told Mary they still hadn't realized what they were really facing. Zeus and Athena remained coiled and ready in the cab, waiting for their signals. Through her mirrors, Mary watched the gang's formation begin to break. Their tight containment pattern dissolved as bikes swerved away from Shadow's demonstration of why military dogs were considered force multipliers. "Shoot that mutt," Blade ordered, but his command revealed his ignorance. Combat dogs were trained specifically for operations involving gunfire. Shadow was already moving to his next target, using the same techniques that had kept him alive through firefights in 3 war zones. "You know what's really sad about this?" Mary transmitted through her CB, her voice carrying the calm of someone who'd faced worse odds. "You people actually think you're dangerous. My dogs have faced Taliban machine gun nests. You're not even a good training exercise." Through her camera feeds, she watched Shadow methodically dismantle the gang's left flank. Each takedown was precise, each movement calculated. This wasn't random violence. This was combat expertise earned in the world's deadliest battlefields. "Zeus, Athena, prep for contact right," she commanded. The 2 Belgian Malinois shifted positions, ready to demonstrate why Force Recon spent years training their dogs for complex combat scenarios. Blade was starting to realize something was very wrong. His gang's standard intimidation tactics were falling apart against an opponent who moved with military precision. The dog wasn't attacking like a trained guard animal. It was executing tactical maneuvers he'd only seen in combat zones. "Fall back," he ordered, but it was too late. Mary had already keyed the right side window release. Zeus and Athena launched into action, their movements synchronized by countless missions together. The gang's right flank discovered why military working dogs were considered among the most lethal assets in modern warfare. "These aren't guard dogs," one biker transmitted, his voice shaking. "They're moving like, oh God, they're military, they're combat dogs." Mary allowed herself a grim smile as she maintained her truck's steady course. Through her mirrors, she watched her K9 team systematically dismantle what had started as a 30-bike hijacking attempt. The Hellhounds were about to learn the hard way why you don't threaten someone who'd spent years leading K9 units through the worst fighting in Afghanistan. The Hellhounds discovered the hard way why Force Recon K9 teams trained specifically for multiple target scenarios. Shadow, Zeus, and Athena moved through the chaos like coordinated weapons, each dog's attack synchronized with the other's movements. Mary watched through her cameras as years of combat experience transformed a highway hijacking into a tactical takedown. "These aren't normal dogs," Blade's voice cracked over the radio. "They're using military formations. Jones, Martinez, fall back and regroup." His commands betrayed his own service background, but Mary had already identified his weakness. He was used to fighting human opponents. "Shadow, Scenario 4, she transmitted in the same calm tone she'd used during night raids in Kandahar. Her lead dog immediately shifted tactics, moving to cut off the gang's escape routes, using techniques perfected against insurgents who'd tried similar evasions. Through her mirrors, Mary watched Zeus and Athena execute a pincer movement that would have made their Force Recon trainers proud. The dogs weren't just attacking, they were systematically isolating key targets, using the same strategies that had worked against Taliban fighters in mountain passes. "They're herding us," someone shouted over the radio. "Since when do dogs? No tactical containment?" The panic in his voice told Mary he had enough military experience to recognize what was happening, but not enough to counter it. A shotgun blast echoed across the highway. Mary's response was immediate. "Contact rear, pattern delta." Her dogs seamlessly adjusted their formation, implementing protocols designed for much deadlier firefights than this. The biker who'd fired discovered why shooting at combat dogs only made them more effective. "Blade, we've got to abort." The transmission was nearly drowned out by the sound of motorcycles crashing, as their riders discovered why you don't try evasive maneuvers against dogs trained for high-speed combat scenarios. "These aren't guard dogs. There's something else." Mary maintained her truck's steady course, just like she had during convoy operations overseas. Her cameras showed the systematic destruction of what had started as a coordinated gang assault. Shadow was implementing containment protocols, while Zeus and Athena executed the kind of synchronized takedowns that had made them legends in 3 war zones. "You know what the Taliban learned the hard way," she transmitted, her voice carrying years of combat experience. "Dogs don't care about your reputation. They don't fear your weapons. They just execute their mission." Through her feeds, she watched that lesson being demonstrated with surgical precision. Blade was trying to rally his remaining forces, but his tactical experience was working against him. Every standard countermeasure he attempted played directly into strategies Mary's team had developed against much more dangerous opponents. His gang was learning the hard way that there's a vast difference between trained attack dogs and combat-hardened K9 veterans. Blade's military training finally showed itself in how he tried to counter Mary's K9 unit. "Form up!" he commanded, pulling his remaining riders into a defensive circle. "These are force recon dogs. They're trained for individual targets. Multiple threats will overwhelm them." Mary almost smiled at his fundamental misunderstanding. Shadow, Zeus, Athena demonstrate why we spent 6 months practicing multi-target scenarios. Her dogs moved like coordinated weapons, each one's attack enhancing the other's effectiveness. This wasn't just training. This was combat experience earned in firefights where the stakes had been life and death. "They're using kill team formations," someone shouted over the radio. Through her cameras, Mary watched the realization hit them. These weren't just military dogs. They were combat veterans who had faced and defeated much deadlier opponents than angry bikers. Shadow took point, using techniques perfected against Taliban fighters who'd tried similar grouping tactics. Zeus and Athena moved in precise coordination, implementing protocols designed for clearing insurgent compounds. The highway battle was transforming into a demonstration of why Force Recon K9 units were considered among the most lethal fighting forces ever deployed. "Flash bangs," Blade ordered, revealing more of his tactical background. "Disorient them like they taught us in the service." But Mary's dogs had trained specifically for this. They'd faced worse in mountain firefights and desert raids. "Counter-roll." "Pattern echo," she transmitted calmly. Her teams smoothly shifted tactics, implementing responses developed against enemies who'd used far more sophisticated weapons. The gang was about to learn why combat dogs trained extensively with explosive devices and disorienting weapons. The first flashbang detonated, but instead of creating chaos, it only demonstrated another level of her dog's capabilities. They moved through the noise and light like shadows, their attacks more precise and lethal. Years of combat experience had taught them to use disorienting conditions to their advantage. "This isn't possible." Blade's voice carried genuine fear now. "No dogs are trained for this level of coordination." His remaining riders were discovering that everything they thought they knew about K9 units was dangerously wrong. Through her tactical feeds, Mary watched her team systematically dismantle what remained of the gang's cohesion. Each dog moved, with purpose, their attacks synchronized in ways that only came from countless real-world operations. The highway had become their battleground, and they were fighting with the same precision they'd used in war zones. Blade's military experience finally betrayed him. Drawing on his service training, he ordered his remaining riders to create a defensive perimeter, exactly the formation Mary's dogs had faced countless times in Afghanistan. Shadow recognized the pattern immediately, his ears twitching in the same way they had before breaching Taliban strongholds. "You recognize it too, don't you, boy?" Mary whispered, watching the gang's deployment through her tactical feeds. "Same mistake those compound defenders made in Kandahar." Her lead dog's muscles tensed, ready to demonstrate why such defensive formations failed against properly trained combat K9 units. "Maintain distance!" Blade shouted to his men. "These are Force Recon dogs. They're trained for close-quarter combat. Keep them at range." His voice carried the confidence of someone who thought he understood military K9 tactics. He was about to learn how incomplete that understanding was. "Shadow, Zeus, Athena, Pattern Sierra," Mary commanded. Her dogs moved like coordinated shadows, implementing a strategy developed specifically for breaking defensive circles. This wasn't just training. This was combat experience earned in firefights where such tactics had meant survival. The first sign that Blade had fatally miscalculated came as Shadow breached their perimeter. The dog moved with the same precision he'd used against insurgent positions, creating gaps that Zeus and Athena instantly exploited. Years of combat operations had taught them how to turn an enemy's defensive formation into a trap. They're inside the circle. The panic in the gang members' voice told Mary they were finally understanding what they faced. These weren't just attack dogs. They were combat veterans who had learned their trade hunting some of the world's deadliest fighters. Through her cameras, she watched her K9 team systematically dismantle what remained of the Hellhounds organization. Each dog moved with lethal purpose, their attacks coordinated in ways that only came from countless real-world operations. The highway had become their battleground, and they were fighting with the same precision they'd used in war zones. "Fall back," Blade ordered, but it was too late. His remaining riders were learning why Force Recon spent years training their dogs for complex combat scenarios. The defensive circle that had seemed so tactically sound was becoming a killing zone as her dogs demonstrated why they were considered force multipliers in modern warfare. Shadow took point, using techniques perfected in mountain warfare. Zeus and Athena moved in precise coordination, implementing protocols designed for clearing enemy positions. The highway battle was transforming into a demonstration of why military working dogs were counted among the most lethal assets ever deployed. Blade's last stand revealed why even experienced military personnel often underestimated Force Recon K9 units. Backed against his disabled bike, he drew a combat knife, the weapon that had given him his name in countless gang fights. But Mary had seen that desperate move before, in mountain passes where cornered insurgents had tried the same thing against her dogs. Shadow, Zeus, Athena, Containment Protocol Delta, she commanded, using the same calm tone that had guided her team through firefights in 3 war zones. Her dogs moved with synchronized precision, implementing a strategy developed specifically for armed opponents in close quarters. "Stay back!" Blade shouted, his knife weaving patterns that might have intimidated regular attack dogs. But Shadow had faced Taliban fighters with years of combat experience. Zeus and Athena had taken down cartel killers who'd specialized in blade combat. This wasn't their first knife fight. It was just their first one on a highway. Through her tactical feeds, Mary watched her dogs execute a containment pattern perfected in urban warfare. Each movement was calculated, each position supporting the others. This wasn't random aggression. This was combat expertise earned in situations where mistakes meant death. "They're not attacking," one of Blade's remaining lieutenants observed, his voice shaking. They're herding us, setting up kill zones like special forces teams." The fear in his voice told Mary he had enough military background to recognize what was happening, but not enough to counter it. Shadow took point, using the same approach angle he'd employed against armed insurgents in Kandahar. Zeus and Athena moved in perfect coordination, cutting off escape routes with techniques learned in close-quarter combat situations. The highway had become their battlefield, and they were fighting with the same precision they'd used in war zones. "I don't understand what you're dealing with," Mary transmitted, her voice carrying years of combat experience. "Those Taliban fighters you heard about, the ones they found in pieces in mountain caves, that wasn't just Force Recon. That was my team, my dogs, the ones you're facing right now." Blade's military training showed in how he tried to counter their approach. His knife work was professional. His footwork showed CQC experience. But he was learning the hard way that combat dogs trained specifically to defeat armed human opponents. Every defensive move he attempted played directly into strategies Mary's team had developed against much deadlier fighters. "They're reading his patterns," another gang member realized too late. "Every time he shifts position, they're not just attacking, they're anticipating, like they've done this before." The awe in his voice reflected a growing understanding of what they were really facing. Mary watched through her cameras as Shadow implemented the final phase of their containment strategy. The dog moved like liquid shadow, 30 combat drops worth of experience guiding every step. Zeus and Athena maintained their positions, ready to demonstrate why Force Recon considered their K9 units to be force multipliers in close quarter combat. "Last chance," she transmitted. "Drop the knife, or my dogs will demonstrate why Taliban fighters started surrendering the moment they heard our helicopter landing." Through her feeds, she watched Blade's face as the full implications of that statement hit him. The highway fell silent, except for the low, coordinated growls of 3 combat veterans who had earned their reputation hunting some of the world's deadliest fighters. This wasn't just about stopping a gang attack anymore. This was about demonstrating why military working dogs were considered among the most lethal assets ever deployed. Blade made his choice, and Mary's dogs showed him why it was the wrong one. The takedown was swift, precise, and demonstrated exactly Why Force Recon spent years training their K9 units for armed opponent scenarios. Each dog knew their role. Each movement supported the others, all working together with the synchronization that only came from countless real-world operations. The remaining hellhounds watched in stunned silence as their leader was systematically disarmed and disabled by 3 dogs moving with military precision. This wasn't just a fight. It was a tactical demonstration of why combat dogs were considered force multipliers in modern warfare. The Arizona highway had become a testament to why you don't threaten Force Recon K9 handlers. Disabled motorcycles littered the asphalt, their riders either contained or fled, leaving Blade and his core team to face the consequences of their fatal miscalculation. Mary's dogs maintained their tactical positions, decades of combat experience evident in every controlled movement. State Police ETA, 3 minutes, Mary noted, checking her tactical display. Shadow's ears twitched at her voice, but his focus remained on the contained gang members. Zeus and Athena held their positions with the same disciplined patience they'd shown during long surveillance operations in Afghanistan. "They're not even tired," one of Blade's lieutenants observed, his voice carrying a mix of fear and awe. "We've been fighting for 20 minutes, and these dogs are still moving like they just started." He had enough combat experience to understand what that meant. These weren't just trained animals, they were conditioned warriors. Through her cameras, Mary watched as realization continued to spread among the surviving hellhounds. Their weapons, their numbers, their reputation. None of it had mattered against dogs trained to hunt terrorists through mountain caves and urban warfare zones. "You know what's really impressive?" she transmitted, keeping her tone professional. "Not once did my team use lethal force. Every takedown was precisely calculated to disable, not kill. That's what separates military working dogs from attack dogs. Absolute control even in combat conditions." Shadow demonstrated this point as one of the contained gang members tried to reach for a dropped weapon. The dog's response was immediate, but measured. Enough force to ensure compliance, not enough to cause serious injury. It was the same precision he'd used during prisoner control operations overseas. "Those aren't just bite marks," Blade noted, his military background allowing him to recognize the pattern of injuries across his team. "Those are tactical targeting points, combat zones designed to disable without killing." His voice carried the dawning understanding that they'd attacked someone far more dangerous than any ordinary trucker. Sirens began to echo in the distance as state police approached. Mary's dogs adjusted their positions slightly, maintaining their containment formation while preparing to hand off to law enforcement, another skill learned in military operations. "Zeus, Athena, prepare for authority transfer," she commanded. The 2 Belgian Malinois shifted with practiced efficiency, implementing protocols developed for transitioning control of detained insurgents to other forces. Shadow maintained overwatch, his combat experience evident in how he anticipated potential escape attempts. The highway scene was about to become a law enforcement matter, but it had already become something else, a demonstration of why military, working dogs were considered force multipliers in modern warfare. The hellhounds had learned the hard way that some truckers carry more dangerous cargo than others, the kind that comes with combat experience and 4 legs. The Arizona State Police Tactical Response Team arrived to find a scene that looked more like a military operation than a highway incident. Their commander, Captain Sarah Rodriguez, had responded personally when the call mentioned military working dogs. As a former MP, she recognized the precision of the takedowns before she even saw the dogs. "Those are Force Recon bite patterns," she observed, studying the contained gang members. "Targeted disabling points, minimal tissue damage, perfect force control." She turned to Mary with professional respect. "You're the handler they told us about, the one from Kandahar." Mary stood with Shadow at her side, Zeus and Athena maintaining their containment positions. 3 tours, Force Recon K9 Division, she confirmed. "These 3 have more combat drops than most Special Forces teams." Through her cameras, she watched the tactical team's reaction to that information. "The Ghost Handler," one of the SWAT officers whispered. The nickname made Mary smile slightly. She hadn't heard it since Afghanistan. Her team had earned that title during night operations, where her dogs had become legendary for appearing seemingly from nowhere to capture high-value targets. Blade, still under Shadow's watchful eye, finally spoke up. "I knew I recognized those tactics. Spring of 2019, Helmand Province. There were stories about a K9 unit that cleared an entire Taliban compound. No casualties, just precision takedowns." He looked at Mary with new understanding. "That was you, wasn't it?" That operation is still classified, Mary replied evenly. But let's just say my team specialized in showing armed opponents that superior numbers don't mean much against properly trained combat dogs. Shadow's ears twitched at her voice, but his focus remained professional. Captain Rodriguez was reviewing the scene with growing appreciation. Every disabled bike is positioned to block potential escape routes, she noted. The containment pattern, this wasn't just defense. This was a tactical operation. She turned to her team. Pay attention, people. This is what real military K9 work looks like. The FBI arrived next, their presence indicating they understood the significance of what had happened. Special Agent Marcus Chen had worked with military working dogs before, and his first action was to check the distances between takedown points. Perfect spacing, he observed. Each dog maintaining tactical zones without overlapping. Even our best K9 units don't show this level of coordination. He studied the pattern of disabled motorcycles. You used their own vehicles as containment barriers, just like that compound raid in Classified, Mary interrupted, but her slight smile confirmed his assessment. Zeus and Athena maintained their positions as federal evidence teams began documenting the scene. Their discipline showed years of experience working with different authorities in combat zones. Your dogs are still in combat stance, Rodriguez noted. Most K9s would have relaxed by now, but they're maintaining tactical awareness. She watched as Shadow adjusted his position slightly to account for the movement of evidence teams. They're treating this like an active operation. Because it is, Mary explained. Until command authority is formally transferred, they consider this a live tactical situation. It's how they stayed alive through 3 tours. She turned to her dogs. Shadow, Zeus, Athena, transition to police cooperation protocol. The change in the dog's posture was subtle but significant. They shifted from combat readiness to law enforcement support mode, another skill learned through countless military operations. Their ability to adapt to different authority structures had made them invaluable in joint operations overseas. The hellhounds, now being processed by state police, watched with a mixture of fear and respect as federal agents photographed their injuries. Each bite mark told a story of precise tactical targeting, showing why military working dogs were considered superior to standard attack dogs. The medical team wants to know if they need to call in a military specialist, Rodriguez reported. These bite patterns, they're unlike anything they've seen before. She studied the injuries with professional interest. It's like watching surgical strikes instead of dog attacks. Force Recon K9s are trained differently, Mary explained. Every bite is calculated for maximum effectiveness with minimum damage. These 3 learned their trade taking down suicide bombers and insurgent leaders. The goal was always to capture, not kill. Agent Chen was reviewing footage from Mary's truck cameras. The way they isolated the leadership element. That's advanced tactical coordination. You don't see that kind of sophistication in civilian K9 units. He paused the video on a particular sequence. Wait, is that the Taliban compound breach pattern? Modified for highway conditions, Mary confirmed. Shadow developed that variation during our last tour. Found out it works just as well against bike gangs as it did against insurgents. Her lead dog's ears perked up at his name, but his professional focus never wavered. The highway had become a study in military K9 operations, with law enforcement and federal agents documenting techniques rarely seen outside combat zones. The hellhounds had unknowingly provided a demonstration of why Force Recon dogs were considered among the most sophisticated military assets ever deployed. Your dogs are already writing the reports in their heads, aren't they? Rodriguez observed, noting how the 3 Belgian Malinois tracked and catalogued every movement around them. I've never seen K9s this engaged in post-operation procedures. They understand evidence collection, Mary explained. Spent 3 tours working with intelligence teams. They know not to contaminate crime scenes or interfere with investigations. She watched with pride as her dogs coordinated with the federal evidence teams, showing the same precision they'd used in combat zones. As the sun climbed higher over the Arizona highway, the full scope of what had happened began to emerge. This wasn't just a failed gang attack, it was a masterclass in military K9 operations, a demonstration of why some truck drivers carried more dangerous cargo than others. The full scope of what happened on that Arizona highway emerged slowly, like classified documents being carefully declassified. As federal agents processed the scene, each piece of evidence revealed more about why Mary's K9 unit had earned legendary status in combat zones. Agent Chen was the first to make the connection to an infamous operation that was still discussed in intelligence circles. That night raid in Kandahar, he said quietly to Captain Rodriguez. The one where an entire Taliban command structure was captured without a single shot fired. 3 dogs, perfect tactical execution, no casualties. He watched Shadow maintaining his professional stance. These aren't just any Force Recon K9s, these are the ones they called the Night Ghosts. Mary neither confirmed nor denied, but Zeus and Athena's slight shift in posture at the old codename spoke volumes. Through her tactical feeds, she watched federal evidence teams documenting what had become a case study in military K9 operations. "Tell me about the compound breach pattern," Rodriguez requested, her former MP experience allowing her to recognize the sophistication of what she'd witnessed. "I've never seen dogs coordinate at that level. It was like watching a special forces team." "Because that's exactly what they are," Mary explained, finally able to share some of their history. "Shadow developed that maneuver during a high-stakes operation. We were facing experienced fighters in urban terrain, and standard tactics weren't working. He figured out that if he modified the standard breach pattern—" "Wait," Chen interrupted, realization dawning. "That was your team? The 3 dogs that cleared the Al-Qaeda safe house in Mosul?" His voice carried both awe and professional respect. "That operation rewrote the book on K9 urban warfare tactics." Through her cameras, Mary watched the Hellhounds' reactions as they began to understand exactly who they'd attacked. These weren't just military dogs. They were combat legends who had helped develop tactics still taught in special forces training. "Your dogs are still running tactical sequences," Rodriguez observed, noting how the 3 Belgian Malinois maintained perfect positioning despite the chaos of the investigation. Most K9s would have downshifted to regular guard mode by now. "They don't know how to stop being what they are," Mary explained. "Every movement, every position, every response is based on combat experience. They're not just following training, they're applying lessons learned in firefights and night raids." Blade, still under guard, couldn't help but comment from his seated position. "The way they breached our formation, that wasn't just training. They anticipated every counter-move, like they'd seen it all before." His military background allowed him to appreciate the tactical sophistication he'd witnessed. "Because they had," Chen confirmed, reviewing more footage. "Look at this sequence. When your men tried to regroup, the dogs didn't just react. They predicted. They faced those exact tactics from fighters with decades of combat experience. The evidence teams were documenting something unprecedented. A perfect merge of military K9 operations and civilian law enforcement. Each bite mark told a story of precise tactical targeting, each disabled motorcycle positioned to create a sophisticated containment grid. "Your team wrote the manual on non-lethal takedowns, didn't they?" Rodriguez asked, studying the pattern of injuries across the gang members. "These aren't random attack points. This is systematic target neutralization." Mary watched Shadow adjust his position slightly to maintain optimal tactical coverage. 3 tours hunting some of the world's deadliest fighters taught us that lethal force isn't always the best option. My dogs learned to control rather than kill. It's what made them so valuable in sensitive operations. The FBI's tactical analysts were already processing the scene data, recognizing patterns that connected to classified operations across 3 continents. Each piece of evidence revealed more about why Force Recon K9 units were considered among the most sophisticated military assets ever deployed. "The way they isolated your leadership element," Mary said to Blade, finally explaining what he'd witnessed. "Shadow developed that technique during a midnight operation in the Hindu Kush. We were facing fighters who specialized in close-quarter combat, much better trained than your men." Through her tactical feeds, she watched understanding dawn across the gang leader's face. His military experience allowed him to recognize just how outclassed they'd been. These weren't just attack dogs. They were combat veterans who had earned their reputation against the world's most dangerous opponents. "Your dogs are already interfacing with our K9 units," Rodriguez noted with professional appreciation. The 3 Belgian Malinois were coordinating seamlessly with police dogs, showing another level of their sophisticated training. "The tactical handoff is perfect. Joint operations experience," Mary explained. "They've worked with military, intelligence, and law enforcement K9 units across 4 continents. Adapting to different command structures kept us alive in combat zones." Agent Chen was compiling a preliminary report that would raise eyebrows. At the highest levels of federal law enforcement, this wasn't just a failed gang attack. It was a demonstration of military K9 capabilities that would rewrite tactical manuals. "The ghost handler and her night hunters," he mused, using terms he'd heard whispered in intelligence briefings. 3 dogs that changed how we think about K9 combat operations, and they're out here driving medical supply trucks. Everyone needs a retirement plan, Mary replied with a slight smile. Shadow's ears twitched at her tone, but his professional focus never wavered. Though some of us are better at retiring than others, the Arizona highway had become more than a crime scene. It was a study in why some legends never really retire. They just find new battlefields, and why you should always check a truck driver's military record before trying to hijack their rig. As sunset painted the Arizona desert in shades of gold, the highway incident had transformed into something that would reshape law enforcement understanding of military K9 capabilities. Mary stood with her team as federal agents compiled their final reports, each detail revealing more about why her dogs were considered legends in combat circles. "We've confirmed your old mission records," Agent Chen announced, his tablet displaying classified files that had just been cleared for review. 37 high-value target captures, 14 compound breaches, over 200 successful combat operations. He looked at Shadow with new respect. "And those are just the ones that aren't still classified." Shadow maintained his professional stance, but Mary felt his slight shift at hearing their old statistics. Through her tactical feeds, she watched the final evidence collection, each piece telling part of their story. "The Pentagon's already requesting your incident footage," Rodriguez reported. "Apparently your dogs just demonstrated several tactics that were previously considered theoretical. The way they adapted combat maneuvers to a highway scenario." "Shadow always did like improvising," Mary acknowledged. Her lead dog's ears twitched at the praise, but his focus remained on their surroundings. 3 tours in combat zones had taught them that operations weren't over until you were back at base. The hellhounds, now being processed for transport, had become unwitting participants in what would become a case study in advanced K9 tactics. Each of their injuries told a story of precise tactical targeting, showing why military working dogs were considered force multipliers in modern warfare. "Your team's reputation in Kandahar," Blade said from his secured position. "The stories about dogs that moved like ghosts, taking down entire Taliban units without casualties, we thought they were exaggerated." He watched Zeus and Athena maintaining their containment pattern. "They weren't, were they?" "Most of them were classified," Mary replied. "But let's just say there's a reason certain insurgent groups started surrendering the moment they heard dogs on approach." Through her cameras, she watched understanding spread across the gang members' faces. Agent Chen was already coordinating with military liaisons. "This incident is going to change how we think about K9 tactical operations," he explained. "The way your dogs adapted battlefield techniques to a civilian scenario, maintaining perfect force control while executing complex maneuvers. They've always been good at adapting," Mary said, remembering countless missions where plans had changed mid-operation. "It's what kept us alive through 3 tours. Every situation is unique, but the principles remain the same." The evidence teams were completing their final documentation, each photo and measurement revealing more about why Force Recon K9 units were considered among the most sophisticated military assets ever deployed. The highway scene had become a masterclass in tactical adaptation. "The medical team's report is fascinating," Rodriguez noted, reviewing the data. "Every bite pattern shows exactly the same force application. Enough to disable, never enough to cause serious injury. That kind of precision usually degrades during extended engagements, because they never stop treating it like a combat operation," Mary explained. "From first contact to final containment, they maintained the same discipline they used in war zones. The only difference was the objective." Shadow's ears perked up at approaching helicopters, military observers, arriving to study what would become a landmark case in K9 tactical evolution. The Pentagon's interest confirmed what the federal agents already knew. This incident would reshape how law enforcement viewed military working dog capabilities. "Your team just rewrote the book on K9 tactical response," Chen observed, watching the 3 Belgian Malinois coordinate seamlessly with arriving military K9 units. "The way they maintained combat protocols while adapting to civilian conditions, it's unprecedented." Mary smiled slightly, remembering similar observations after particularly successful missions overseas. Her dogs had always excelled at proving what was possible, at pushing the boundaries of what military working dogs could achieve. As night fell over the Arizona desert, the highway scene transformed one final time, from a crime scene to a teaching opportunity. Future K9 units would study what happened here, learning how 3 combat veterans had adapted battlefield tactics to stop a gang that thought they were unstoppable. Ghost handler and her night hunters, Rodriguez mused, using terms that had become legendary in military circles. Retiring, but never really retired. She watched the 3 dogs maintaining their professional focus despite hours of operation. Some things you never stop being. Mary checked her delivery schedule as the final evidence was collected. They were behind now, but her medical supplies would still reach their destination. Through her tactical feeds, she watched her dogs begin their stand-down procedures, combat veterans transitioning back to their civilian roles while never losing the edge that had made them legends. The Arizona highway had taught the hellhounds a lesson they'd never forget and reminded everyone else why some truck drivers carried more dangerous cargo than others. As Mary's team prepared to resume their route, Shadow, Zeus, and Athena maintained their vigilant watch. 3 combat veterans who had proven that some legends never really retire, they just find new missions to complete.